undergrad. She is currently doing her PhD she just finished her PhD in political science from Cambridge. She's been a foreign policy advisor to Vice Prime Minister Shimon Peres. She has worked for McKinsey, so she has a lot of exciting things to teach us. She also came to Ivey last year. I don't know if any of you caught that. So please help me welcome Einat Wilf.
Okay, thank you, and welcome. I understand for many of you here it's the first time in Israel, and I understand you have a very exciting and packed program ahead of you, so I certainly hope you enjoy it and enjoy your stay here. I think it's wonderful that you all came. What I'll try to do in the next hour, I'll speak for maybe half an hour and then leave time for questions and answers, is to give you a bit of an introduction to the Israeli economy, but a more historical introduction. By the way, quietly and discreetly, if you do want to get a drink or something, feel free to do so. So I will give you a bit of a background to kind of understanding the Israeli economy. I will focus less, I'll talk a bit about it, but I'll focus less on the numbers and figures. You can get that very easily on any website. But I'll give you a little more of a sense of the history and what's behind, in a way, where the Israeli economy comes from, because I think it might help you understand as you meet people and listen to talks, just to give you a sense of where everything fits. So I think the most important thing to know about the Israeli economy is that from the beginning it was a very ideological economy. So economy in Israel was always very tied to the ideology of establishing a homeland for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So building an economy for a new sovereign state for the Jewish people had a heavy ideological weight. And it was an act of construction, an act of building. Now, at the very first, when in the 19th century, Jewish thinkers started talking about having a homeland for the Jewish people, one of the things they wanted to solve is what they viewed as the unnatural economic structure of Jewish existence. The irony, of course, is today pretty much this is the structure of the global economy. But at the time, especially with the 19th century romantic views about the land and working the land, the view was that real people work the land, and that people who deal with money or bankers are somehow leeches on the economy, and that fed into, of course, the various anti-Semitic views. And historically, for generations and centuries, Jews were excluded from what were perceived important parts of the economies in their countries, such as land ownership. And they were relegated at the end of the day to dealing with issues that were considered unfit for the Christian citizens, such as dealing with money. And many of the early Jewish thinkers internalized the anti-Semitic views that this was somehow not normal, and that the Jewish existence of working in banking and finance, some of them, not all of them, was somehow eating other people's work, that it was a secondary form of existence. And the early thinkers felt that by returning to the land, by coming to Israel to establish a homeland for the Jewish people, they will be correcting something that is wrong with Jewish existence, and as a result, anti-Semitism would disappear, and the Jewish existence would become normal again. It would be normalized. That was kind of the key ideal of the early Zionist thinkers, that by returning to a homeland which the Jews were exiled for more than 2,000 years, by having a normal economy, their existence would return to be normal, and they will be citizens like all other citizens and all other people in the world. And this was very much connected to land. The idea was that The Jews were returning to a land, not just in the kind of romantic, historical form of returning to their ancient homeland to which they prayed, but also returning to working the land, to owning land, to cultivating it. This was a very key element in the early Zionist ideology. And the feeling was that it was called that the Jewish existence in exile is an inverted pyramid. So very few people are actually working the land, and too many people are in what we would call today services. And that somehow by going back to Israel, there would be a need to reinvert that pyramid back to normalcy, to have a mass of peasants working the land, and maybe only at the top a few people who deal in services. And of course, the great irony is today, the global economy is this inverted pyramid, and it's considered right and good and normal. But at the time, there was a lot of baggage and ideology attached to the feeling that somehow the Jewish economy in exile is different from the general economy, which was a peasant land economy, and that has to be corrected. Now, this was related ideologically not just to the Jewish issue. A lot of the early Jewish Zionist thinkers were socialists and socialist utopians. Many of them were from Central and Eastern Europe. They believed in the 19th century utopian ideas of socialism and solidarity, and they felt that by coming to the land of Israel, they would not only be creating the proper pyramid of occupations, they will also be building a true socialist economy that is based on, they created a merger between kind of old biblical Jewish values of solidarity and the newer thinking about 19th century secular ideas of solidarity. And that was considered, again, something that was very integral to going back to the homeland. And what was unique about Zionist socialism, that it was named constructive socialism. And the idea was that, according to Marx, to establish the socialist or communist utopia, you needed to engage in destruction. You needed to destroy an old order in order to create a new one. For the Jewish Zionist thinkers, the view was that by coming to the land of Israel, they are already freeing themselves from the old order in Europe, and mostly in Eastern Europe, and they do not need to engage in a revolution. They do not need to overthrow anybody. They do not need to take anyone to the guillotine, because they are building something from scratch, and because they're building it from scratch, they can create the proper socialist ideals without overthrowing an old order, which is why it was called constructive socialism, and the view was that we are constructing a new economy from scratch according to these new ideals. So the economic action in Israel, from its very core, had a very, and from the very start, had a very, very strong ideological component. And if you have read or will choose to read the early Zionist thinkers, you will see that they devote a lot of their thinking to the economy and how the economy will be structured, because that was considered a core element of the Zionist ideal. So from the very early on, Israel took a route, or the early settlers, in which later became Israel, took a route of building a socialist economy, but one that is very different from the one that we know from communism in Eastern Europe and from the Soviet Union. According to kind of basic communism, at the end of the day, the workers have to own the means of production. What Marx saw as wrong with the capitalist economy is that the workers did not own the means of production.